So I've decamped from Twickenham. I was at the game earlier, but there was so much going on at full time with the Barbarians match still to come. I thought I would come back home, give it some time, and then upload my video now. So apologies for the slight delay, but there's a few different things I think we can go through. Quite an interesting game, not exactly the most thrilling, but for both teams, I think there are things that they will take out of it. So have your say in the comments, like the video and subscribe to the channel whilst you're here as well. But yeah, I suppose it's one of those, isn't it? That I think South Africa will look at this. It was a comprehensive win, but they were nowhere near their best. So pleasing thing for them that they still won by such a convincing margin without necessarily playing that well, particularly their first half performance. And from Wales's point of view, it ends up being a heavy defeat, but for a good 60 minutes of that game, I think it was a lot closer and a lot more of a contest than many people would have expected. So there are things on both sides to get into. Overall, to me, it really had the feel of a friendly. And I know on the one hand it was, in so much as they weren't playing in a specific competition, but you can still have standalone international matches that feel like full-blooded test matches. This was a million miles away from that, and there are reasons for it. Both teams have injuries, both teams have players they're not able to select and are missing players at the moment. Both sides are kind of probably have half an eye on their series against Australia and Ireland to come later this summer. So there are a few different reasons, but it was a little bit flat in a way. And in fact, the top note that I made was, this feels like a friendly. Both teams are broadly going to be pleased with it without anyone really shining. It was kind of one of those games you get through, you take the positives from, and you move on. So I suppose the question then is, what were the positives? Let's start with the Springboks as the winners, and technically the home team here. You always felt like South Africa had enough in this game, even though it was a 1-point margin at half-time, even though actually, I think a lot of people, I was kind of there at half-time thinking, well, fair play Wales, this is a heck of a lot closer than I expected it to be. You still felt that South Africa, when they wanted to shift through the gears, we're going to have enough to be able to get the victory. And that's what it proved in the second half. The other thing as well, which I just wonder, is how much the travel affected the Springboks. So what was it? They travelled on Wednesday, so they were getting to London kind of midweek towards the end of the week. You're not going to have a huge amount of training time. I know the players are used to having to do travel because of the URC, but I just wonder, particularly in that first 40 minutes, whether actually the travel for the Boks had a little bit of an impact. It was a little bit lethargic areas of that performance. But I think the big thing for South Africa is two things. I think some of the players that came into the team, the debutants, I'll get onto them. And the thing I mentioned already, they didn't play that well. And they've just had, what, a 30-point margin of victory against Wales. And actually, in particular, I think the way in which they were able to come out after half-time, where the momentum wasn't necessarily with them, it was a 1-point game, and they scored, what was it, the Mapimpi try really quickly. They then got a penalty after that. They scored 10 points in the first 10 minutes of the second half, and that just set the tone for them to be able to do what they did for the rest of the game, and they scored some great tries. But I think it's impossible to talk about the Springboks and not talk about the debutants. So Edwill van der Merwe, first of all, was sensational. His form in the URC rewarded, and what is it with South Africa being able to find scrum hat wearing, really quick, dangerous, explosive, exciting wingers? Like, he is another one, isn't he? He's a different player to Cheslin Colby and Kurtley Arendse. They're all kind of different, but there's still something so similar about them as well in terms of their scrum hat wearing, their feet, their strength, their ability to do something special. And he did that with the try in the second half. So delighted for him and his performance. And then the other one in particular, I thought Jordan Hendricks had a decent game at 10, but was kind of that first period where it was a mixed bag, I suppose, for South Africa. They did some really good stuff, but then they were much more impressive in the second half. But Feinberg Mngomezulu coming off the bench, knocking over, what was it, 55-metre penalty? I honestly reckon he had almost another 10 metres on the length of that kick. Like, he's got an absolute cannon. Plus the fact of his all-round game, he looked really, really impressive. I know in South Africa, and those of you that have watched him week in, week out are really excited about his potential. That's another one for me that I'm really keen to see how he did. And then you had Ben Jason Dixon coming off the bench. So overall, I think the players that came in for the Springboks and the impact they had was positive. Afalele Fassi, another one, I know he's been capped before, but he's never really established himself at fullback. I thought had a pretty decent game under the high ball. That was an obvious tactic of Wales to hoist it long, hoist it high. They had some decent change out of that, but Fassi was pretty good at full-back as well. And given the fact that I think one of the areas that the Springboks got so right in the last 4-year cycle was the way in which they were able to develop the team and bring players through whilst still being pretty consistent. The fact that they've done it in the first game following the last World Cup, the start of a new 4-year cycle, bodes pretty well for the future. They just have a knack of doing it. I think Erasmus and those coaches know how to bring players in, how to get the best out of them, and how to build that strength in depth, which we massively saw today. Let's get on to Wales, though, because it is a funny one, isn't it? Overall, huge credit to Wales, I think. When you looked at the two teams, and yes, they both had injuries. Yes, they both had players they couldn't select. You still looked at those two team sheets, and I spoke to someone in the press gantry today at Twickenham, a former Wales player who was there working, and he said, I reckon this is going to be 50, 60 point defeat. That was, I think, a genuine expectation. And Wales, for a lot of it, were far more competitive than that. I suppose for Wales, they will hope that this can be some sort of platform for building into the Australia tests, because they had a really poor Six Nations. They're on a run of defeats. They've had loads of issues with injuries and off-field stuff. But can they build on their game? And how long will the fans be patient with a kind of spirited but still fairly comprehensive defeat being good enough? I think for the time being with this game, because of the thing I already mentioned about it feeling like a friendly, most people, the players, the fans will come away and say, do you know what, let's take the positives from that and let's move on. We have bigger challenges and more realistic challenges to come, I think, in facing the Wallabies compared with facing the Springboks. So at what point do they need more than that? And I think a good example is looking at it from a tactical point of view. So one area of the game that they clearly felt like they could have some success in was Sam Costello hoisting the long, high hanging kicks crossfield for Liam Williams to chase. Because Liam Williams, he was playing on the wing today, but we know he's brilliant under the high ball, having played fullback so much. And there were quite a few occasions where actually that worked really, really well for Wales. So that's kind of one specific individual tactic. At what point are they able to add more layers to their game so that they become a more all-round team, so that they become a team that you look at matches like this and think, well, you never know, they might be underdogs, but they'll be able to get a victory. Whereas I still feel like at the moment with Wales, you're not looking at that when you're looking at them playing the Springboks. So can they kick on? Can they build on it, essentially? As I say, huge credit to them. I think there are players that will come out of it with credit. I thought Basham in the back row was good. I thought Ben Carter, he came off for James Ratty, didn't he, in the second half? I thought he was good. And actually, generally, the way in which Wales fronted up physically, I think will be a massive positive for that coaching team. The scrum penalties seemed to go both ways. I wasn't quite sure how the ref was seeing some of those areas, but scrum penalties went both ways. You wouldn't say that they got absolutely dominated physically. Yes, obviously, coming up against that South African pack, they're always going to have their moments. They're always going to have time where they get themselves on the front foot. But I thought Wales handled them relatively well. But they've also still ended up losing by almost 30 points. So that's kind of the funny period where we are with Wales at the moment is, despite the heavy scoreline, you can still take positives because we know they're not in the best place and they have a massive, massive rebuilding job on their hands. The final thing for Wales I'll mention as well, in terms of the positives, I think is how they dealt with those sin bins in the first half. So Ria Dyer went off. Then it was the penalty try for South Africa to take it to 14-3 and Aaron Wainwright went off. So it was a period where they had 13 basically. And actually, I think they kicked a penalty in that time. They were able to see out that period quite well, whereas I was thinking South Africa would turn the screw and ramp up the pressure. So a funny old game, a match that felt like a friendly in the sunshine with Twickenham, a nice day out for the family rather than a kind of the intensity of a proper test match. Both teams, I think, will take that 80 minutes and they will move on to two really intriguing test series. I think it's the perfect time for Wales to be playing Australia with all the uncertainty around the Wallabies, a new coach coming in, a rebuilding phase for them, and that series, South Africa against Ireland. I can't wait for it. It's going to be absolutely awesome. It is as exciting a summer series as I can remember for a long, long time. So let me know, what did you make of it? Anything else you would add to those points that I've touched upon? Let me know in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel whilst you're at it, and I'll see you in the next one.